So our third snippet for this week looks at the constitutional effects of the Revolutionary War. And again, this is not a kind of military or political history. We're looking at the progress of the war per se, but in constitutional terms, one of the immediate effects of the decision of the colonies to declare independence from Great Britain is that all of these royal charters, remember I mentioned in the first snippet that when the British Crown created a new colony, it gave to someone, an individual, so William Penn in Pennsylvania, a royal charter, a document, which served as in effect the constitution of the governing charter of the individual colony. So now that the colonists are no longer recognizing the authority of the king, they have to create these new state constitutions to replace the revoked charters, and these constitutions only a couple of them continue to survive to the current day. So in a lot of ways, they're not relevant to the contemporary environment, but they are really important because the one way to look at the Revolutionary War is that it's a period of constitutional experimentation. The colonists have to find a way to set up charters for their own governments. And this begins with the first and the most radical of these state constitutions in the Revolutionary period, the Constitution of the Pennsylvania government, 1776, of which Benjamin Franklin is a prime author. And this is in the immediate aftermath of the decision to sever ties with the British, a belief among the delegates who create this constitution that government is dangerous, that government can deny rights, that you need to ensure that government is very, very responsive to the electorate. And the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776 does this in a variety of different ways. First of all, it leads off with the Bill of Rights. It explicitly makes clear the various rights that all citizens of Pennsylvania will possess. That they have the right to defending life and liberty. They have a right to property, right to pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. That they have a freedom of speech and of writing and publishing their sentiments. I mean, you see some of the principles behind the Due Process Clause and the Fifth Amendment, the freedom of religion and speech in the First Amendment in this Pennsylvania Bill of Rights from 1776. A very, very strong emphasis on rights. And then the second aspect of this is they want as wide an electorate as possible. This is not universal election, so this is what passes for radical in the America of 1776. So we're confining the election to men. They have to be over the age of 21. They have to have resided in the state for a year, and they also have to have paid some form of taxes. So the idea is to exclude the destitute and the poor from the electorate. The goal is to elect a unicameral, one-house legislature filled with men who are noted for their wisdom and virtue. We'll be seeing a lot of these terms in the constitutional era. The framers of the Constitution are obsessed with this idea of virtue, and the job of politics is to elect virtuous men. Again, we're just talking about the election of men during this period. Not in none of the colonies do women have the right to vote. This is a legislature that is extremely responsive to the electorate. The Pennsylvania Constitution has a mandatory rotation policy, what we would now call term limits. And so individual members of the House cannot serve for any more than 4 years out of 7. And the idea here is that if you have a system in which the legislators know that they will be forced to live under the laws that they pass, they will be less likely to pass laws that deprive the citizens of liberty. And to ensure you don't have a legislature that's engaging in tyranny, the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776 mandates annual elections. So this is a powerful legislature. There's no Senate, just a House of Representatives in the Pennsylvania system, in which the people have constant opportunities to to sort of refresh the membership if they go off on the wrong way. There is a very weak executive power within the Pennsylvania Constitution. The president is elected through the legislature. And you can see his powers here that I've sort of highlighted in the dark red on the chart. This is a very, very limited power for, they call it a precedence. We would now call it a state governor. So there's the power to appoint a commission, judges, and naval officers to protect the colony, because of course or protect the state at this point, because the British are engaged in war. They can transact business with other states. They can grant pardons, and they'll be the commander of the military forces in the state. But they're not involved in the legislative process at all. They don't have veto power. They have very, very limited cabinets. This is a very, very powerful legislature, very weak executive, very strong Bill of Rights. These are what the Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776 is known for. And then finally, this provision. One of the intriguing aspects, I think, of these state constitutions in the Revolutionary War period is that the framers understood that they were engaged in a kind of constitutional experimentation. And so most of these state constitutions have a kind of bizarre idea. So let's try it out and see how it works. And most of these ideas go by the wayside for very good reasons. In Pennsylvania, the kind of example of constitutional experimentation is this document called this provision called the Council of Censors, and this is the Pennsylvania Constitution version of judicial review. So judicial review as exists now in the United States. If if a person thinks a law is unconstitutional, they can challenge it in court. If it's a federal law, eventually, and the Supreme Court agrees to hear it, it will get kicked up to the Supreme Court. What the Supreme Court says goes in terms of constitutional interpretation. That power is not given to the judiciary in the Pennsylvania Constitution, and the principle of judicial review will not be established in the United States until the early 19th century. Instead, under the Pennsylvania Constitution, what we call judicial review will be done by a council of censors, which will be elected every 7 years, and just they'll exist for a year, and they'll go through all the laws that were passed in the previous 7 years and determine, is this law constitutional, yes or no. They'll also have the power to order impeachments. They'll also have the power to call constitutional convention. This Council of Censors winds up never meeting because the Pennsylvania Constitution gets rewritten in the early 1780s. But this is significant for our purposes because it fits this idea where these framers are trying to come up with new ways to structure the government. And virtually all of these state constitutions have this provision. So, for instance, the New Hampshire Constitution of 1776, also a quite radical early state constitution. It creates a bicameral legislature. So there's an assembly, a House of Representatives, and a council. But its experimentation is to set up a system in which the House of Representatives will elect the 12 members of the council, what we would now call the state Senate. So basically, the real power remains in the assembly, but then both. To get a law, it has to be passed by both the Assembly and the Council, whereas in the Pennsylvania state constitution, it was just the House of Representatives. There was no Senate. Most other states do not follow New Hampshire in this idea of constitutional experimentation. So these early state constitutions, which set up really quite weak state governments that were extremely responsive to the popular will, run up against the reality of the Revolutionary War. This is a painting of Valley Forge, sort of one of the low points of the war. The U.S. is fighting a colonial rebellion. It needs a government. It needs state governments that are strong enough to carry out the war. And as the Revolutionary War proceeds, the pattern is for stronger and stronger state governments. And a classic example of this is the Massachusetts State Constitution of 1780. This is the State House in Boston. The Massachusetts Constitution of 1780 is the oldest still existing constitution in the Western world. It's been amended several times, but it still is the governing document of Massachusetts. And unlike New Hampshire and Pennsylvania from the early Revolutionary period, which have very powerful legislature, very powerful lower branch of the legislature, very weak executive, the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780 makes clear that the Senate not the Assembly or the House of Representatives, will be the first branch of the legislature. And it establishes, in a way that was quite unlike these early state constitutions, a separate electorate for senators. So you have to have an annual income of £3 to be able to vote for the Senate. So essentially, the idea here is you'll create a constitution that has a two-branch legislature, but where the Senate is the stronger branch of the legislature, and where middle class, upper middle class, and wealthy people are the only people who have a vote in for the legislature. There is a very powerful governor in the Massachusetts state constitution. The Constitution gives to the governor a formal veto power, which, of course, remember, was wholly lacking in the Pennsylvania Constitution, and gives to the governor the power to prorogue the general court. The general court is what the Massachusetts Constitution calls its state legislature. So if the legislature is being recalcitrant under this constitution, the governor can say, "All right, go home. I'm going to govern in your stead." This is a kind of classic imperial power. You occasionally will still see this in Canada, where the prime minister will ask that Parliament be prorogued. It's a very unusual power in U.S. state constitutions. But the idea here is that there's a backlash against the Pennsylvania and New Hampshire constitutions. The sense that having an overly powerful assembly or House of Representatives is dangerous. You need a state government that can do things, and you need to empower the executive along the way. And the Massachusetts experimentation provision is the creation of this body called the Governor's Council, which it's a very, very unusual system. It's still around in Massachusetts. The only states that have one of these are Massachusetts and New Hampshire. It's kind of a third branch of the legislature, but there are a variety of powers that the governor's council possesses. So confirmation of judges has to be done not by the state legislature but by the governor's council. Pardons are also done by the governor's council in Massachusetts. So the idea here is to weaken the legislature even further, really, in the Massachusetts provision, by taking away some of these powers from the legislature. So the theme here is that all of the states during the Revolutionary War period have to create their own state constitutions. Pennsylvania has to do two of them, and there is a pattern. The pattern is the initial constitutions tend to empower the legislature and to respect Bill of Rights. The later constitutions tend to have more powerful senates and governors, and all of these state constitutions have provisions that at least in one way or another experiment and create sort of new things. And keep this in the back of your mind, because it will pop out in the Constitution as well.